should lullaby.
This is the episode that I've been thinking about when it comes to celebrating the 10th anniversary of The Loud House. It's been 10 years since the show premiered on Nickelodeon, and to be in a positive mood when it comes to spreading positivity in this fandom, I'm gonna be reviewing White Hare, as the episode, well, the show would have been something else entirely if it wasn't for the last minute decision on having the rabbit characters be human characters, while also cutting more than half of them up. The premise is that Lincoln is attempting to impress the new girl that moved in, and he prevents having any interaction from his sisters, knowing full well that they would make the same mistake as they did before in Heavy Metal, and after he manages to succeed, he ends up hitting his head on a tree after witnessing multiple rabbits, and this leads to us the original style and direction that this show would have taken if it wasn't for the last minute change. Rabbits. As Lincoln is wallowing in his unconsciousness mind while we witness 25 of Lawrence's sisters. Yeah, this was originally the premise of The Loud House in general, with the majority of Lawrence's sisters being 25 rabbits, and knowing full well that it was too complicated to juggle them all, I can instantly say for a fact that having the show being one boy with 10 sisters while also being human is honestly the best solution. Sitting through this episode multiple times, it really gave me the impression that this show would have been like any other Nicktoon when it comes to having animals taking center stage, and in my opinion, it's really difficult to witness the type of main bunny or rabbit, well, the only differences that they have is outfits. They may have different eyes and different face structures, but at the same time, they're literally the same character with different costumes. Granted, they do have different personalities, which were referenced in early Loud House episodes, specifically Lori taking full control of her siblings. But on the other hand, when you see the rabbit as a goth, which is the resemblance of Lucy as a goth, you can really tell for a fact that they had ideals on having one of these characters have a focus, but unfortunately with their own trait of being into love, being into goth, and that's literally the only trait, it would be difficult to remember these characters' designs and personalities, especially their names, which is going to be a lot more difficult considering that I can remember all the Loud Sisters' names, even though that getting into this show for the first time, it was difficult for me to adjust to it, and it won't apply if this show actually happens rather than the show that we ended up getting. Reliving these moments upon rewatching this episode always gave me the impression that if this show ended up becoming successful, it would easily be forgettable, and the world building that we would have seen from this show would have been all rabbit-based, which isn't a problem, but on the other hand, since that it will lead to so many sacrifices from the Loud House series, then I would say for a fact that this will probably have less of an identity, even if it attempted to have an identity. Like, not to say that any of these scenes are boring or bad, but with the information in mind that this is technically the original Loud House, I don't even think it's possible to have Warren have a good personality like Lincoln. I mean, since that the formula is still the same with him being the only boy in a family full of sisters, it's gonna be difficult to see him bond with the other sisters in the same fashion as Lincoln bonding with his sisters. But to be fair, seeing him attempting to flirt with the new girl is something that would happen in the main series of the Loud House if Lincoln is attempting to impress the new girl, but not in the ways of his sisters getting in the way. And considering that if he was attempting to do all this and he still messes up, it's still believable and, truth be told, done more better than how he was executed in the live-action spin-off. You see, the types of development from this episode would make me see that if Lincoln acted this way, he would be flawed but done correctly in comparison to how he was portrayed as the series progressed. To the point that you can instantly see that he could do something like this in front of a new girl and will still mess up to the point that with how he tries to impress the other girl, specifically Ryan from Heavy Metal, and it's mainly the fact that it was his sisters getting in the way, he really doesn't want to do the same thing as before. But since that in this situation where Warren has to take the advice from his sisters and it's not working out for him, really, if Lincoln avoided that, he still wouldn't be able to succeed, and this episode wouldn't be as good, to the point that I would probably side with the Loud Sisters more than Lincoln, which is something that I don't usually do in this show, but more on that later. Danny, who is the animal version of Clyde, really feels like the type of character that you would experience in other animal cartoons, and while his design is for what it is, it really gave me the impression that they really wanted to have a Chad character, but due to the change, they wanted Clyde to be less of a Chad and more of a friend to Lincoln. Like, I can say that this chemistry might work if the writing was on point, but on the other hand, it's gonna be a little difficult for me to see the chemistry between Warren and Danny in the same veins as Lincoln and Clyde. I'm just saying, I still enjoy how this episode is structured when it comes to the alternative world of rabbits, if this wasn't all human. But on the other hand, I'm always convinced that if I'm going to enjoy a show like this, I have to be really invested with these characters, which is going to be impossible to do with how the direction is taken. It's not a terrible direction, but on the other hand, it made me see that with how good this episode was, it won't look good for a show of itself. If you compare the rabbit scenes to the bits involving Lincoln and his sisters, truth be told, it's night and day, with the Loud Sisters having more personality and more attention than the rabbits. Then it's kind of difficult to believe that this show would become a big hit if it had rabbits as the focus rather than humans. Even if they included the personalities and episode ideals from the Loud House and tried to incorporate them in this type of show, it may work in some cases, but for the majority, not so much. Even in one of the worst episodes, won't be able to work in this if technology doesn't really exist. Specifically, the greenhouse episode. I mean, regardless if the bad episodes wouldn't even exist in this type of timeline, the idea of that show reaching to seasonal watch is incredibly unlikely. To well that this change of translating the characters from rabbits to humans really is the best of what makes the Loud House a popular cartoon 10 years ago when Nickelodeon premiered the season 1 episodes. You can always imagine that how things would have done differently if it didn't took that route, but since that we live in the world where that show, specifically the Loud House, starring humans, ended up becoming a bigger hit, I'm going to assume that if the main characters are taking care of rabbits, or in some case meet the rabbit counterparts, it wouldn't even work out. Not to say it's a terrible idea, but at the same time, people will probably be invested with the Loud characters more than the rabbit characters. So, with this episode already becoming 8 years old, 3 months ago. I think that the biggest example onto why that this episode exists is supposed to showcase what the Loud House is really capable of, with the third season, with this episode being part of, being a showcase of what the show can do for the future. Now, I understand that people are going to say that the Loud House should have ended after season 3, to the point that season 4 is where the downfall began, but there will still potential on making the show good, even if it cannot top of what they did. Specifically, Lincoln's bond with his sisters, and this is where me being on Lincoln's sister's side more than himself, judging of how that they've learned from the mistake from heavy metal, and in this position, when it comes to Lincoln focusing on the new guy, they really knew what this all means to Lincoln. Like, they pretty much knew that he would overreact in this type of situation, to well that him avoiding his sisters is literally the only option, since that's what he's been doing throughout the majority of these 3 seasons. But after they confess that they want Lincoln to be the real him, as in being his perfect self, is really a showcase that they have known each other a lot more by this point. Granted, there were some bits and pieces in this season where they don't get along, but on the other hand, this really feels like the final step of completing the arc of instantly knowing Lincoln and respecting Lincoln, and for the most being nice towards Lincoln. Seeing Lincoln in this season is really his best season by far compared to the other seasons. That's mainly including the bad episodes, well, you're familiar with. And what really makes this difficult to believe when it comes to people who think that this show would have done better is the fact that Chris Savino written this episode. He didn't just directed the episode, but also written the episode from beginning to end. This episode convinced me that Chris Savino would have saved his show if he wasn't a terrible person. As much as I look into the rabbit hole, no pun intended, involving the scandals involving Chris Savino, I can't be able to deny that this show would have been saved, even though it's not in favor of putting the other female workers in unfair treatment. And all in favor just for this one show isn't fair, but that's really what makes this episode better, but also depressing to think about, since that Chris Savino wrote this episode. He wrote Lincoln really likable instead of being selfish, and his motivations made sense on avoiding his sisters. And when it comes to how he written the Loud sisters, despite how little screen time we seen of them due to the rabbits, it made me convinced that he is willing to up his game on trying to make his show better. Times like this just makes it difficult to believe, and if I had that knowledge, if I watched the Loud House from the very beginning, I would have liked this show more better thanks to this episode alone, and I would feel like everyone else who felt upset due to how the quality went to decline upon entering season 4. I mean, watching this series for the first time in late 2021 was really a different time for me, since I was binge watching cartoons at the time. But once I got to the Loud House, the more I think about it, the more I realize that episodes like these showcase of what the Loud House is capable of, but due to how bad the show has gotten, no one is ever going to look at episodes like these again, to where you would see the potential of what the show would have been like. And it's sad that we're not going to be able to have more episodes involving around this when it comes to development and bonding when it comes to Lincoln and his sisters. It's one thing that they had to listen to the fans, specifically children, on what they want from this show, but on the other hand, that really sacrifices all the goodwill and development to the point that it's gonna make people convinced that Lincoln is a terrible boyfriend, to the point that it wouldn't be the case in 2018 when this episode came out. Even though I'm more of a Lincoln and Gold Jordan shipper, I couldn't deny that the idea of having Lincoln being paired with Stella isn't a bad idea. But considering that this is all about diversity without writing with the inclusion of diversity, honestly, it's difficult to think about what diversity really means to this show with how it's for brownie points, which it's difficult for me to believe that in comparison to other cartoons that attempted to do diversity. Even though that this episode didn't age well due to the circumstances, this is still one of the best and important episodes of The Loud House, with what the show would have been like and how the creator is the writer of this episode. It's just a shame that nearly 3 months ago, before the episode's premiere, people are probably not going to look into this episode due to how big Chris Savino's scandals were. So, as far as I'm concerned, if I ever met Chris Savino, I would probably have to know what it feels like on being an animator while also seeing the struggles of what women had dealt with due to them being around him, or anything when it comes to making an episode in general, which gave me an idea that could be a potential video. I've been thinking of doing a Chris Savino video with him being a self-insert of Lincoln himself, and the fact that Nickelodeon can't be able to distance themselves from the creator by having Lincoln being a terrible character, by unleashing their frustrations on him due to him being a self-insert Chris Savino. Truth be told, Nickelodeon is only reminding us of Chris Savino by doing that type of treatment on Lincoln in the later seasons, and that's really the most of what I can address for now. I'm giving this episode a 9 out of 10 and happy 10th anniversary of The Loud House.
You is the start of life for me.